Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us here at Settle Avenue Louisa facility for last in the series of the first round of community conversations around the Brooklyn Village redevelopment. My name is Dennis Lacaria, Senior Assistant to the County Manager, and I have oversight for this project. Also joining me today will be Monty Ritchie, the President of the Conformity Corporation, Greg Kola, Director of Investments with the Peebles Corporation, and Jeffrey Simon of Stantec. Monty will walk us through a brief presentation, and then we will be open to fielding questions and answers from you all. We'll be seated up here in a panel type presentation. We are seeking input and feedback from folks, especially those who have not previously attended one of our prior meetings, based on what you see and hear today, because tomorrow evening at 6 o'clock we will be hosting a town hall meeting at the Charlotte-Mecklenburg Government Center in room 267 starting at 6 o'clock to report back out to the community at large what we've heard as we've moved through this community conversations. And we definitely want each and every one of you to be there to make sure that we're reporting accurately on the things that we've heard. Prior to the start of that meeting at 5:30, we will be screening a documentary called A Colored School. If folks were at the town hall kickoff meeting, we screened a few short minutes of that documentary as a way to set the table for the meeting to follow. The filmmaker and producers have graciously shared the rights with us to broadcast the documentary in its entirety, and so we will be screening that at 5:30 ahead of the meeting at 6. This meeting, just like every meeting throughout this entire process, is being videotaped. So when we move into the Q&A comment session, please wait for the microphone to come to you if you have a question or a comment, because that's the way that that audio gets captured, so it can be viewed on the video. You can actually find all of the videos on YouTube, Mecklenburg County's website, or the Brooklyn Village website if you'd like to refer back to anything that was said at any of the prior meetings or any of the other topics that we discussed. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Ritchie.
Thank you, Dennis. So if you've not been here before, would you raise your hand, please, if you've never been with us before at one of these meetings? Thank you all for being here. So I'm presenting to 3 people currently. Everybody else has been here before, so thank you guys for coming. I'm going to move through the slides fairly quickly with an eye towards getting to Q&A as rapidly as possible. But you should feel free to, heck, you can stop me if you need to along the way, or just refer to the slides whenever we get to Q&A. We can go back and look at them if we need to. My name is Monty Ritchie. I'm president of the Conformity Corporation, which is a local real estate development company in business since 1993. We specialize in high-density urban infill and historic preservation. We've done about $250 million worth of development in the past 25 years or so, 23 years within 3 miles of Trade and Tryon. We have several partners on this project. Conformity is a 2-phase process for approvals. Conformity Corp went through the first phase on its own, and after that, we were introduced to the Peebles Corporation as part of moving through the RFP process, the second stage in the approval process. And we were also, it was actually Stantec who helped make that introduction, and I appreciate that very much. We have Jeffrey Simon here from the Boston office today, Craig Lewis in the Airsley office, which is the Charlotte office of Stantec and the Airsley development in South Charlotte. A huge firm. We'll talk about that in a minute. Stantec is, so it's good to know they've got a Charlotte presence. Peebles Corporation, large multi-billion-dollar company. They have projects up and down the East Coast. They've developed in Washington, D.C., Miami, New York, Boston, Philadelphia, San Fran, Las Vegas, and other markets. There's a handful of their projects right here. Gregory Kola, who's their head of investments, is here with us today, and Don Peebles will be with us, who's the chairman and CEO of the Peebles Corporation. He'll be with us at the 6 o'clock session this evening. A couple examples of Conformity Corp projects. There's some residential projects up top. a mixed-use project here on the bottom that is in the Dilworth and South End area. This is all the housing and mixed use wrapped around the Lowe's Home Improvement Center in South End, about an $83 million project. And then this is a preservation project in one of Charlotte's in-town historic districts called the Rutzler. We did that back in 2005. So sampling of some of our work, and we think that our local expertise, the quality of our projects, our professed ability to do things that are incremental and will not feel monolithic whenever they are built across this 17-plus acres helped us, and combining that with the national experience that we have from other team members resulted in a win for us. This is Stantec's profile here. As I mentioned earlier, big firm, 22,000 people. They're all over the world. And in this particular case, they'll be managing their work from Airsley in South Charlotte, where they have an office. When we first got going on this project, one of the challenges that we had, and there are any number of challenges, but the big overarching challenge is tied to the history of Brooklyn, the difficulties around the history of Brooklyn and urban renewal that took place there. Over 1,000 homes, 13 churches, over 100 businesses. The most organized and complete African-American community in the state, and one of the most organized in the country in terms of being cohesive and self-sustaining. So caught up in a combination of urban renewal right around the same time that integration efforts were underway, and some of those outcomes were quite bad. And so the county at that time, actually the redevelopment authority at that time, funded with housing and urban development funds at the federal level, cleared about 227 acres in uptown Charlotte, just an absolutely massive undertaking. And across that land, there are 4 buildings left today. It's very difficult, if not impossible, to make out what was there at one time. So we have had to put a lot of thought into how do you go about creating a place that honors the heritage of Brooklyn, and the essence and the spirit of Brooklyn you see here in quotes. Because we're certainly not going to rebuild Brooklyn, and there are certain things that are just impossible for us to achieve. So we'll talk a little bit about how we hope to accomplish things that are more about a population of people who were displaced by the removal of Brooklyn, and a little less so about buildings that were removed by way of urban renewal. This slide just points to a timeline, talking a little bit about some of the things that, one of the key things that we heard about repeatedly from folks who are former residents of Brooklyn or attendees at the Second Ward High School is the energy that they felt in the Brooklyn community. So how do we go about building a new place that respects the past but is necessarily connected to one of the most thriving central business districts in the country currently? We're building products of all types here: residential, office, retail, hotel, some cultural space. Obviously, we have some parks and the related parking spaces. Totals about 2.3 million square feet. Could be less, could be more. We're in negotiations with the county on that now, but I think what is important to recognize is that it's a large project. It is a wide-ranging project in terms of uses, and if done properly, we should have no problem getting to a community that has an 18-hour behavior to it, so that there's life there most hours of the day. So here's some of the things that we've done to get there. This is 2nd Street, looking towards uptown Charlotte. We're standing on McDowell now, looking towards uptown Charlotte. 2nd Street is a newly constructed street that runs right through the center of one of the blocks. And this 2nd Street is located where the original 2nd Street in Brooklyn was located. The street we know today as Martin Luther King was named 2nd Street prior to becoming Martin Luther King, but that's not where 2nd was originally located. They named that 2nd with the urban renewal plan. This is the actual location of 2nd. You have some retail on the bottom floor, some housing in the distance there. You have a condo tower that's poking up right here. And then sort of off and out of sight here on the right is some parkland, and then there is an office building beyond that. This is an Even Hotel right here, part of the International Hotel Group collection of brands. You have a restaurant here on the right, and if you proceed down this side. So now we're on 2nd Street, but we're looking out towards McDowell. So we have our back towards Uptown right now. Behind us is the Baptist Church. And we're looking out towards McDowell and kind of the direction of the Greenway and CP and Presbyterian Hospital. So you have the park here on the left, the condo tower, restaurant here, and the Even Hotel off in the distance. And then there's out of sight here over our left shoulder is the office building. So there are two separate sites in Brooklyn Village North and Brooklyn Village South. This is Brooklyn Village South, and in the foreground here we have a hotel and some housing. There's retail along the street here, and then an office building in the back, and large format retail on the bottom of that. We tend to see this site as being a little bit more vehicle-centric. The retail bays here are likely to be a little bit larger than what you would see in, say, Brooklyn Village, where we intend to have smaller bays, restaurants and shops and that type of thing. I'll move to the plan here in just a minute, but you'll see that Brooklyn Village North is a little more protected from a planning perspective, and Stonewall lends itself to vehicular traffic. And despite that, a group of in the development community is also trying to sort of tamp down the traffic speeds and so on. So let's talk a little bit about some of that stuff. So this is Stonewall viewed from another direction. Here we're looking towards Metropolitan Midtown. Here we're kind of looking out towards the football stadium. Again, Brooklyn Village South, you have our office building in the foreground, some residential here, retail on the bottom floors, a Staybridge Hotel. Then a local developer, Prophet Dixon, has an apartment venture here. Northwood Raven is here, Crescent is beyond that, and then you move on down to the Charlotte Observer site, you have Lincoln Harris, and before you know it, you're to, actually on the other side of Crescent, I think you have another on the far side of, yeah, that's right, no, by the way, you have the Weston deal, thank you, Bobby. So you have the Weston deal, which is an office project, and then you move on down to Lincoln Harris's site. So everything on the south side of Stonewall, from the football stadium all the way down to Metropolitan Midtown, is under development. Charlotte Center City Partners has put together a group on that to focus on what we can do to help soften this and make this more palatable for folks who would want to be there on bike or on foot, because for those of you who are familiar with that street, it is not those things today, not even close. So over time, we hope to see that corridor improving. This is a plan view of the south site. So we've talked about these things. We'll move through this quickly. The hotel, some multifamily, the office tower, and then on the bottom you have some retail happening here. This pink dashed line you see is we're gonna talk about repeatedly here in a few minutes. This is a little planning mechanism called Myers Passage. This is Brooklyn Village North. Mix of uses, office, residential, retail, hotel. The park is here. The cultural space is here. So this is a little larger of the two sites, over 11 acres. The Brooklyn Village South is about 5. And again, you see Myers Passage sort of running through here. And what Myers Passage does is it connects Brooklyn Village North and Brooklyn Village South along another original road line, Myers Street, that ran past the Myers Street Elementary School whenever Brooklyn was still around, ran immediately adjacent to the still existing Second Ward High School gym. And there are a number of things that are happening today, even with everything having been demolished, that allow you to sort of make out where Myers Street was. And it does a great job of bringing Brooklyn Village North and Brooklyn Village South together. When you stand here, the old Ed Center's right here, and you can stand here and move over just to the side of the gym and look towards Brooklyn Village, and you can see Myers Street running through there. There's nothing built on it but for a little cell tower down here. There's a civil courts building here. It has a breezeway through it the size of a street. That's Myers Street. Runs right through that courtyard. And then you can make your way on up to First Ward. Two existing blocks of Myers Street pick up near the post office as you move on up into First Ward. So it is at once a street that folks who grew up in Brooklyn and went to high school in Brooklyn recognize, but it's also a very important street in terms of the things that were occurring there whenever Brooklyn was still with us. You can see it here again in aerial. You have Brooklyn Village north here, and then the Myers Passage running through in Brooklyn Village south. So we were with Parks and Recreation Commission recently, and you know, one of the stories that we tell that we think is a good one is folks come here to go swimming. These are often multi-day events, and family comes to a swimming event, stays at the Stay Bridge, realizes that they've forgotten some piece of athletic gear. Large format retailers are over here. Lunchtime, they go over here and they have lunch, proceed to a grocery store, pick up some chips or something that they're going to eat that night whenever they go back to the hotel. So pretty much everything is right there, and this distance is about 500 feet through here, and you just move back and forth between the two sites. Another view looking towards Metropolitan Midtown and the hospital area and out towards the Greenway. We think that the office building and the other things we have going on here are going to help pull pedestrians and bike riders up Stonewall under 277 and through McDowell, where it passes under 277 over here. And part of the way we're doing that is by establishing this gate post, this architectural massing that will help draw people through those tougher spaces and get them into uptown Charlotte as we try and glue everything together, whether it's uptown to the Second Ward or Second Ward to Midtown. We have to be deliberate about how we get that done. This is the park facility. It is surrounded by a variety of uses, retail, office, housing, restaurants, and activated on three sides here. Great visibility on 3rd Street. There's on-street parking today on 3rd, and we would undertake an effort to soften that edge condition even more to make it more usable. As part of the feedback we've received, some folks have suggested other locations for the park, perhaps flipping it to the Martin Luther King Boulevard side of that 11 acres, and we welcome your thoughts on the park as well. Another view of the park here, just looking down in plan. This is something that we have come upon recently, and I think this credit on this probably goes to Craig, if I recall correctly, with Stantec, the idea of a festival street through here, or it may have been called Geneston Stone, I just can't recall, but programming this street as an active space that can be shut down and used by folks who are visiting the park or visiting the retailers. There's any number of communities around the country and even locally where you can find streets that have been shut down permanently, but you can also find streets where they shut them down on, say, a Saturday or a Sunday, and then there are activities in the street. So this seems to lend itself perfectly to that type of behavior because there won't be a lot of traffic here, and you have a number of retail shops in the park on the other side, and it seems to work just beautifully for the type of space that can be programmed. And of course that ties into to Myers Passage there. We have some details from the park. This stained glass installation that you see here, the idea here is to evoke the memories of all the churches that were lost. 13, one of the most stunning things to me, 13 churches tied to African American congregations were demolished as part of urban renewal. And underneath that we have a concrete installation that has routed out Sanborn map details, which I showed an old map earlier with the yellow squares on it as historical fire maps. And these historians use these frequently to go back and say, hey, what was there back in the day? So the map I showed you earlier was from 1929. So it can pick up details from those maps, whoops, and do this type of thing where we can lay out exactly what certain parts of the neighborhood looked like. Now, these are just ideas. We've been kicking these around with any number of folks, but most specifically former residents of Brooklyn and attendees at the Second Ward High School. The public park design is a public process in and of itself. So these are placeholders, things that we thought were good ideas, but they are not hard and fast and are subject to change. But they give you an idea, give you some impression of the type of thinking we're doing around memorializing or paying homage to the community that came before Brooklyn Village North and Brooklyn Village South. So we've been through a number of different meetings. We kicked off this process on August 4th, and since then we've done any number of topical sessions, history, cultural programming, and design elements, MWSBE, which is Minority, Women-Owned, and Small Business Enterprise. So we've had discussions that are specific to getting minority businesses engaged in what we're doing. We have a 35% participation goal. By the way, that's our commitment to MWSBE, a project that exceeds $680 million in cost. There's about $270 million by that math committed already to minority participation. And we expect that those costs will climb. Affordable housing and public space, and then economic opportunity and approach to retail. And each time we did one of these topical meetings, each time we did one of these, we had an evening meeting, we had a morning session just to mix it up a little bit. We changed the locations, did what we could to provide variety and improve attendance and outcomes. Next steps, we're doing this session all day today. We've done this twice already today. We'll do it one more time this evening. The idea here was to push one more time to get some folks who we've not seen before to come out and chat with us a little bit. So appreciate y'all being here and to answer questions for you. And then tomorrow night we do a town hall meeting, which will be entirely unique. We will report out on everything that we have been hearing and give folks an opportunity to tell us whether or not we're telling them is what it is that they think they've been saying, right? So we want to, well, you think we heard this, this, and this. And folks will have the opportunity to go, well, yeah, but there's also a little bit of this that you didn't include, that type of thing. And then we will carry that information to the County Commission in November for their consideration. So that's it for this presentation. Our contact information is here, which I'll leave up for a minute if you need any of that. The best way to get to us is just to Google Brooklyn Village, and our website will pop up, and you'll find everything else you need there. And we will take questions. I have a couple fellows joining me up front here. Greg Cola from Peebles will be with me, Jeffrey Simon from Stantec, and Dennis will be with us from the county. Thank you.
I have a quick question. What is the schedule for construction? When do you think you'll start your infrastructure, and how long will that take?
Bobby, we've talked about that a lot. I think probably first quarter of 2019, maybe late 2018. We have this process with the county to work through our documents with them. And then there'll be an entitlements process for Brooklyn Village North, a rezoning process. Brooklyn Village South is already properly entitled, so we'll have to move through that process, which, as you know, is probably a 6-month process front to back. Building permits, it's a UMUD district, so there'll be architectural reviews on that. So late 2018, early 2019, I suspect.
Do you think that first initial quarters would include things like the park and roads and all that kind of stuff?
Yes.
Open to debate.
Yes.
The county has asked us to deliver the park and the infrastructure in the first phase.
When is the county supposed to vote on this?
We'll ask Dennis to talk about that.
Well, the county has already approved the selection of the partner and has approved this concept. So that approval has already been granted, which is why we're in this phase of the process to solicit the community feedback. The next step for the county commission will be to ultimately bless what we report out, and then to vote on and approve the contract after it's negotiated. So,
I guess more specifically, when is the county going to vote on selling Marshall Park?
well, the county commission voted to start this process last October. So they're committed to moving forward with this. And so the conveyance of the actual property will be dictated by the contract that's ultimately negotiated, and then depending on what is in that contract will be a development agreement, and it will specify at what date and at what price each of the parcels will be finally conveyed. But all of that will be negotiated and then be in that development agreement, which they will approve. And we're thinking it's probably 4 to 6 months from today to have an agreement.
A couple questions. First, are you guys working with the aquatic center at all? Is there any cooperation talks? It seems like it's right between the two sites, and it seems like there's a potential there.
So I spent, the short answer is yes. I was with Jim Babb and Jerry Clark, I believe, and David Marsh just last week, talking extensively about the aquatic center. We have a number of resources, including a family friend who's got a son with a ton of promise that bring a really interesting perspective on swim facilities and so on. My partners at Peebles and Stantec haven't been terribly focused on this for reasons that are entirely innocent, in that it's not a mature conversation. So my goal has been to remain up to speed on what it is that they're trying to achieve. Not a for-profit enterprise, obviously, but they're trying like heck to add a second pool bowl. You may be aware of that they're trying to add a second pool and to turn that into one of the top facilities in the nation. Over time, that will probably be something that we consider again as we think through final iterations of our plan. But it's not having a huge impact on our discussions today. So yes, familiar with pool conversations, not having a big impact on us right now.
And this may be too granular at this point, but any thoughts or discussions on including B-cycle stations and some sort of bike infrastructure that people could move around easily via bicycle?
We haven't talked about that in any detail, but I don't think it's too granular at all. I mean, I think the park location lends itself to one of the stations that you're referring to. I imagine that there's warrants of some type. There's I don't know who's driving the public bike program, but I can't imagine we'd be averse to that, because it works seamlessly with what it is we're trying to achieve there. But do our plans include bike station goes here? They do not, but we see a lot of pedestrian and bike movement through the site, particularly by way of Myers Passage. So I could see how that would ultimately happen if we can accommodate it somehow.
Well, and I want to point out that the park that BK will be building, that Bobby referenced, will be a Mecklenburg County park. We've heard folks that seem to be confused and think somehow that this was going to be a private park to benefit the development. It is actually going to be a Mecklenburg County park, and given that all of the other county parks in proximity to Center City have B-cycle stations, I would absolutely expect that to be a part and parcel of that program.
And sorry, the last question. Why the large format retail on Stonewall? Was that just something that as developers you think works in that area, or is that a cry that you heard said, hey, we need more of this near us already? And can you give me an example of what that would be?
So we have over 250,000 feet of retail on Brooklyn Village North and Brooklyn Village South. It's a lot of retail. Frankly, we're not entirely sure that that'll hold up from a market perspective. We're working on those types of things now. But if we do end up building out 250,000 square feet of retail, by definition, that is not all inline shops. Just not possible. We will end up with a variety of shop types that inform the success of one another: anchors, larger format, and inline. The inline tends to be around the park and in Brooklyn Village, where things are a little more intimate. We have tried to figure out how to create an internal something at Brooklyn Village South, something that's protected and intimate and so on, and it hasn't panned out. So the retail is going to present itself to Stonewall. And that seems to lend itself a little more completely to, 4,000 square foot users, 5, 6, 7. This is a clinical example, but the size is right. Do we want a vitamin shop there? No, but a vitamin shop is the right size. That type of space, which is in the 4,000 square foot range. We only have a handful of those running down Stonewall. We do have some inline on Stonewall as well, and then an anchor at the corner.
Well, I could go back, back to the aquatic center. That parking lot's about 2 acres. I love this idea, except for taking Marshall Park. That's a big thing for me. The school, I think, has parking lot there. The aquatic center lot is about 2 acres. Essentially, Marshall Park's 5.5, and the park you've proposed is 2. So if you could get 2 acres from their parking lot, maybe some from the school parking lot, and incorporate what they need, their parking, into the development, I think it's excellent. But is that something y'all have looked into or considered?
So we have heard from folks that they're concerned about the size of the park, and this would be another tick in that column, right? That you'd like to see the park.
It's not the size; it's the actual park. I mean, I know I've seen articles. It's forlorn, it's lonely, but it's a big gathering spot. It's got the amphitheater, which is very important. It needs some love. If it had the treatment that Romare Bearden had and the new one in First Ward, be a different story. But I know we learned with Fourth Ward Park years ago when we had Springfest. It started out in Fourth Ward Park, and it quickly outgrew it. And you just 2 acres is really small for an entire, basically all of Second Ward. The reason Marshall Park doesn't have as much activity, people walking through it, is because there's nothing around it to bring it. There are no restaurants, there's nothing. Whereas the minute you put residences and retail in here, I think it would be utilized tremendously.
We don't disagree that the park becomes more active with all the uses that we have in mind around it. But we were charged with the demands of an RFP, and we delivered on all of those in spades, actually delivering more park space than any of our competitors. But we have heard from neighbors, stakeholders, the public generally, that they'd like to see the park be larger, and that's a conversation that I'm sure we'll end up having with Mecklenburg County as we think through how to finalize our agreements.
I may have more of a comment than a question. With such a, complete plan, and certainly the best plan that could be presented, I think I was lost. It seems to me it'd be logical for the piece in between to be added, the old Second Ward site. And so I know you've made efforts towards that, and I think perhaps maybe if there's some way that the public could advocate for that, I think that might make this a more complete plan. I don't know what the county process is, but it just seems logical. So hopefully that works out.
Well, one quick thing to note there, and I know you know this, but just for everybody else in the room, the Charlotte-Mecklenburg Board of Education owns the old Metro school site, not Mecklenburg County. So it wasn't the county's to offer, and that is why it was excluded from the RFP. But I'll let Mr. Ritchie speak to his efforts.
We did make as you know, we made an offer on that land some time ago, and we are tastefully cajoling staff and the board to revisit what they have in front of them. And we'd love very much to own that land. It would, I think, fundamentally change the plan in even the most basic ways. You know, the plan would likely change entirely, and that's not a bad thing as long as we, keep the, the ethic in the right place and are aimed at the right things. Having additional land's not a bad thing, but today we do not have clarity on whether or not we'll ultimately come to own that.
And we'd welcome other comments as well, not just questions, because we do want the feedback.
Thanks for doing this, guys. By the way, my name is Rick Thurman. I'm new to the team at Center City Partners. So just a couple more thoughts. I mean, clearly we're losing live music venues every time we turn around. I think there's an opportunity here, maybe even to physically move the double door, pick it up, move it, place it here. So I would encourage you to think about that. I think that's an amenity, of course, to the people here, but also that is something that residents in the city keeps asking for.
I thought about this in the second session. Folks mention things like that, and we basically nod and say, okay, there's not a lot of note-taking happening up here. I just want you to know we have professional note-takers in the audience at every session, so we are capturing all this feedback, and of course, everything's videotaped, so thank you for that observation. Anything else? All right. We're right here if you have additional questions for us. Thank you.